He had always thought love was a game, something to be toyed with, something he could manipulate to his favor. And when Ethan laid eyes on Clara for the first time, he knew she was different. Yet his pride, his arrogance, and his reckless desire to test her feelings for him turned her into nothing more than a pawn in his carefully constructed plan. Because he believed if he could provoke her jealousy, if he could make her burn inside at the thought of losing him, then she would fall deeper, so deep that she would never think of leaving him. But what he hadn't counted on was the silent strength inside her heart, the quiet dignity that endured his games until it no longer could. And that was the moment when his entire world began to shift. In the glittering halls of high society where Ethan thrived, his name was powerful, his wealth endless, and women fluttered around him like moths to a flame. But Clara was different. She had met him when she was nothing more than an assistant to a publishing house, where his family's company invested millions, and what began as a chance conversation in a crowded office turned into a whirlwind of encounters, each more electric than the last, until they were inseparable, two people from opposite ends of the spectrum who somehow fit together like two halves of a broken soul. But Ethan's ego, his endless hunger to prove that he was untouchable, made him whisper one day to his friends over expensive whiskey that he could make, Clara jealous enough to cling to him forever. And so he began weaving his cruel game, inviting another woman into the picture, a woman from his circles named Vanessa, elegant, calculating, and all too willing to play along if it meant being seen on Ethan's arm. Slowly, Clara began to notice the changes, the way his phone buzzed with messages when they were together, the way he let his hand linger too long on Vanessa's back at a charity gala, the way he smiled just a little too intimately in her direction, while Clara stood at his side, trying to believe his whispered assurances that she was the only one he truly loved. And at first Clara told herself she was imagining it, told herself Ethan was too good, too passionate, too deeply connected to her soul to betray her. But each little cut dug deeper, until the pain was no longer something she could ignore. And while Ethan congratulated himself in secret for the way, Clara's eyes darkened when she saw him with Vanessa, for the way her hands clenched around her glass when another woman's perfume lingered on his suit jacket. What he didn't see was the walls rising slowly around Clara's heart, the quiet decision forming in her mind that she would not be his pawn forever. She had grown up with nothing. She knew what it meant to lose, to sacrifice, to live without the luxury of pride. But she also knew that dignity was the one treasure she would never let anyone strip away. And as Ethan escalated his game, staging fake wedding announcements whispered through their social circle, letting Vanessa flaunt a glittering ring on her finger that Clara knew had once been promised to her, she felt her heart shatter in silence, not with loud cries or public scenes, but in the way she began to pack away pieces of herself, in the way she started planning her exit while he believed he had her trapped. And the day finally came when Ethan, drunk on his own arrogance, staged a dinner in which Vanessa played the role of his fiancée to perfection, her laughter chiming through the candlelit room as Ethan watched. Clara's every reaction, waiting for her to break, waiting for her to confess that she couldn't live without him. But instead Clara rose from the table, her face calm, her eyes holding the storm that Ethan didn't yet understand, and she said nothing more than, "I wish you both happiness," before she turned and walked away, leaving her wine untouched, her heart in tatters, and Ethan frozen in disbelief, because it wasn't supposed to end like that. She wasn't supposed to leave. She was supposed to fight, to cling, to beg, and yet she didn't. She slipped from his world as quietly as she had entered it, vanishing from his life without the dramatic tears he had expected. And in that silence, Ethan felt the first crack in the armor of his pride, though he refused to acknowledge it at first, telling himself he would lure her back, telling himself she would come crawling when the loneliness became too heavy. But night after night, the empty space beside him whispered a truth he tried to bury. He had loved her all along, and in losing her, he had destroyed the only woman who had ever truly seen him beyond the wealth, beyond the arrogance, beyond the facade of control. Clara, on the other hand, carried her broken heart into a new chapter, refusing to let her soul rot in the shadow of a man who treated her as a game, even as memories of his laughter, his touch, and the fire in his gaze haunted her dreams. But she held fast to her decision, because love, true love, was never meant to humiliate, never meant to reduce a woman to a pawn, and so she walked into the unknown, not realizing that every step she took away from him carved the lessons that would one day bring Ethan to his knees, begging not for her jealousy, not for her surrender, but for her forgiveness. And this, dear viewers, is only the beginning of the storm between them, a storm of passion, betrayal, realization, and redemption. So if you are gripped by Clara's strength and Ethan's dangerous game, if you want to know how far love can fall before it rises again, then don't miss the next chapter, because the fire is only about to ignite more fiercely than ever. And make sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss the continuation of this unforgettable story. Ethan had thought he was in control, thought Clara would return to him after a few days, broken and desperate for his attention. But as weeks turned into months and her silence stretched into a void he couldn't fill, he began to understand the unbearable weight of his mistake. For the mansion felt colder without her laughter echoing through its halls. The business meetings felt emptier without her steady presence encouraging him to be more than just his father's heir. And the nights became unbearable when he reached for her in his dreams, only to awaken to sheets that smelled of nothing but emptiness. Vanessa, sensing his growing distance, tried to cling to him, tried to remind him that their staged engagement could be made real, that she could give him everything Clara couldn't. But every time Ethan looked into her eyes, he saw nothing but the reflection of his arrogance, a mirror of the shallow world he had once embraced. And he realized with a crushing certainty that Vanessa had never been part of his future. Clara had been his light all along, the one who had challenged him, softened him, believed in him when he himself had believed in nothing, and now she was gone. He tried to find her, scouring the city, using his influence to trace her steps. But Clara had vanished with the determination of a woman who knew her worth. And though she was hurting too, she refused to let him find her easily, because deep down she knew that if she looked into his eyes again, she might shatter, she might forgive too quickly. And she couldn't allow herself to be dragged back into a love that had humiliated her. She found work in another town, away from the circles that had mocked her when Ethan paraded Vanessa at his side. She built a life in quiet strength, surrounding herself with small joys, a bookstore where she worked long hours, evenings spent sketching in her tiny apartment, mornings sipping coffee on her balcony where the sunrise reminded her that life still offered new beginnings. And slowly she began to heal, but the wound of Ethan's betrayal still pulsed deep inside, a scar that made her wary of trust. Meanwhile, Ethan spiraled, drowning himself in empty parties and hollow smiles, his friends whispering behind his back that he had lost his edge, that Clara had been his grounding force, and without her he was unraveling. And the truth was undeniable. The man who had thought love was a game now knew that love was a war he had already lost. Desperation pushed him further, and when he finally tracked Clara down through the help of an old colleague, he found her standing behind the counter of a small bookstore, her hair pulled back, her face more radiant than he remembered because it was touched by independence. And in that moment, he knew he had never truly seen her until then, stripped of the glittering backdrop of his world, shining on her own. And he felt his chest tighten with a mixture of longing and regret. But when he stepped forward and said her name, her eyes hardened, not with hatred, but with the quiet armor of a woman who refused to be deceived again, and she asked him calmly what he wanted. Her voice steady, though her hands trembled beneath the counter, and Ethan, for the first time in his life, stumbled for words. Because "I want you back" felt too shallow, too selfish, and "I love you" felt like a lie unworthy of her trust. So instead he whispered the truth he had denied for so long. "I was a fool, Clara. I played with something sacred, and in losing you, I learned that you were never my pawn. You were my queen, the only one who mattered. Her breath caught, because the words she had longed to hear now arrived too late. And though part of her wanted to run into his arms, the other part remembered the ache of sitting alone while he flaunted another woman as his bride-to-be, and she told him with quiet firmness that love without respect was nothing, that she had built herself back from the ashes he left her in, and she would not crumble again for the sake of his pride. Ethan didn't give up. He came back day after day, not with roses or flashy gifts, but with small gestures, helping her carry boxes, fixing the squeaky door of the shop, standing silently in the corner just to prove that he could be present without demanding. And slowly Clara began to see the cracks in his arrogance replaced by humility, the sharp edges of his ego softened by sincerity. And though she fought against her heart betrayed her in the quiet moments, when his hand brushed hers and the old fire sparked again. The townsfolk began to notice too, whispering about the wealthy man who humbled himself for the quiet bookstore girl, and Clara found herself torn between the ache of the past and the hope of the future. But Ethan knew this was his last chance, and so he did the one thing his old self would have never done. He let her go again, telling her one night as the shop closed that he would wait as long as it took, that he would prove himself not through words but through the life he would build, and if she chose never to return, he would still love her from afar. Because loving her had finally taught him the difference between possession and devotion. Clara watched him walk away, her heart breaking in a new way, because this time his love felt real, stripped of games, and though she wasn't ready to forgive, she also couldn't deny that the man leaving her doorstep was no longer the arrogant master of her pain, but a man reshaped by loss, humbled by love, and desperate for redemption. Weeks passed, and one evening as the autumn leaves fell, Clara found herself standing outside his home, her heart pounding, because despite everything, love had not died. It had only been buried beneath betrayal. And when Ethan opened the door and saw her there, tears filled his eyes as he whispered her name like a prayer, and she stepped inside, not as his pawn, not as his possession, but as his equal, his partner, the woman who demanded respect before love. And in that fragile, beautiful moment, they both understood that their story was not about jealousy or games, but about a love reborn from the ashes of pride. And so, dear viewers, if this story has gripped your heart, if Clara's strength and Ethan's transformation have moved you, then don't let go of the flame we've built together. Make sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss more stories of love, betrayal, heartbreak, and redemption. Because the journey of hearts like these will keep reminding you that true love is never about power, but about surrender. Love, they both discovered, was not a fairy tale that ended with forgiveness. It was a battlefield where scars were tested, where old wounds bled again when the world pushed too hard. And as Clara stepped into Ethan's life once more, not as a pawn but as a partner, she knew the path ahead would not be easy. Because while she had forgiven, forgetting was another matter, and Ethan knew too well that every action, every word, every silence from him now held the weight of proving his love was real. The early days of their reconciliation were fragile, filled with hesitant touches and long conversations, where Clara demanded honesty and Ethan bared himself in ways he had never thought possible, sharing not only his regrets but his fears, the childhood scars of a father who taught him that love was weakness, the endless pressure to be invincible, to win at any cost. And Clara listened, not with the blind devotion of before, but with the discerning heart of a woman who had learned the hard way that love without truth was nothing but quicksand. And she found herself softening, not because he begged, but because he showed her the man behind the arrogance, a man who was broken too. But just as their fragile bond began to strengthen, the world around them conspired to test it, for Vanessa had not disappeared. Quietly, humiliated by the collapse of her staged engagement, her pride wounded by the whispers of their social circles, she nursed a venomous grudge against Clara, seeing her not as a woman of strength, but as the thief of the life Vanessa believed she deserved, and Vanessa returned with vengeance burning in her veins, spreading rumors, planting seeds of doubt in the press, orchestrating encounters designed to make Clara question if Ethan had truly left his old games behind. Clara, though stronger now, still carried the ache of betrayal in her bones. And when she saw Vanessa's smirk at a charity event, when she heard whispers of Ethan's past mistakes repeated like poison in her ear, her chest tightened with old pain, and she found herself recoiling, asking Ethan with tears in her eyes if she was foolish to trust him again. And in that moment, Ethan faced the greatest test of all. Would he retreat into arrogance, into defensiveness, or would he fight for her with humility, with patience, with truth? He chose the latter, standing before the entire crowd and declaring with a voice, steady and unashamed, that Clara was the only woman he loved, that the rumors were lies, that he had once been blind but now saw with clarity, and his words, so raw and public, stripped Vanessa of her power and left Clara trembling with the realization that this was no longer the man who toyed with her heart, but a man willing to be vulnerable even at the cost of his reputation. Yet love's tests were not only external. Clara's own fears gnawed at her. The fear of losing herself again in a man's shadow, the fear of repeating the cycle of pain, and Ethan's challenge was to not only love her but to lift her, to build a life where she could shine as brightly as he did. And so he made choices that shocked those who knew him. He stepped down from his father's company, choosing instead to invest in Clara's dreams, turning her small bookstore into a thriving chain with her vision at its core, placing her name, not his, on the banners, proving to the world that he was no longer the master pulling strings but a partner who believed in her light. Clara, overwhelmed, found herself facing the truth that love was not about perfection but growth, not about never falling but about rising stronger each time. And as Ethan knelt one evening, not with the arrogance of a man expecting her surrender, but with the humility of a man offering his heart freely, she looked into his eyes and saw not the player who had once shattered her, but the man who had rebuilt himself piece by piece. And though tears blurred her vision, she whispered yes, not because she had forgotten the past, but because they had both learned from it. And in that whisper a new chapter began, one where love was not a game, not a pawn to be moved, but a kingdom they built together, brick by brick, respect by respect, heart by heart. But dear viewers, the journey of Ethan and Clara reminds us all that love is never simple. It is forged in fire, tested by storms, and reborn from ashes. And if you felt your heart race with every twist of this chapter, if you want to walk alongside them as they face even greater trials and higher stakes in the chapters to come, then make sure to subscribe to this channel now, because the fire of their love story is far from over, and what comes next will shake them to their very core.